Hello, my friends, and welcome to the Wake Up with Giants radio show. I am Lady Luck, and I am joined here in studio by Nick, the gentle giant, and our special guest co-host today, Jenn Turnham. And today we are talking about the secret superpowers of highly sensitive people. And I'm really, really intrigued about this topic because I have always said that my senses are very highly sensitive, most of my senses. And Jenn's going to talk to us today about her coaching and what's that based on, who she bases her coaching on, and the small population that she actually coaches when she's coaching sensitive people. Welcome, Jenn.
Thank you for having me. It's a real pleasure.
I think the cool thing about this show is now we get to dive into your expertise, right? So that'll be fun. So the super secret superpowers, right?
That's a lot of supers.
Yeah, I'm gonna add more in. The super duper secret powers of the superpower. Yeah, the highly sensitive. So can you tell us a little bit about that? Like what is a highly sensitive person? Who is a highly sensitive person?
Okay, so that's I'll give you the short answer to that question because
Yeah.
I've done a whole workshop on how to tell if you're highly sensitive. But basically, there's 4 criteria, and it's an acronym which is DOES, DOES, and the D stands for depth of processing. So highly sensitive people process everything very deeply. So people who kind of relate to the term overthinkers are very often highly sensitive, not always, but that kind of is the layman's term for it. But depth of processing really refers to our brain is always looking at connections and processing everything at a really deep level. So it's a little bit more than, I'll give you an example. So when you try and remember a phone number and you just, hi, Laurie. So when you try and remember a phone number and you're just repeating it over and over again, that's shallow processing. Whereas deep processing is when your brain's looking for links. So it's looking for links with previous experiences. It's trying to make sense with everything. And that's what HSPs do on a basically all the time. We can't switch it off. So that's the D in depth of processing. In terms of, Melissa's asked, how does anxiety affect the overthinking aspect? So the research suggests that HSPs are no more susceptible to anxiety than non-HSPs. But obviously, if somebody does suffer anxiety, because anxiety is essentially normal thinking gone awry. So it's when we kind of get stuck in those loops of unhelpful thinking that we can become anxious. So they're definitely linked, the overthinking and the anxiety, but they're not one and the same. So anxiety is something that I'm really passionate about in terms of people getting fixed, because I feel like in society, we've gone off on a complete tangent here. I hope that's okay.
Yeah, it's perfect.
No, it's okay.
I remember where we left off. So
it's all good.
It's still on the screen, luckily, so it's a reminder. Yeah,
we'll come back to
it. So my big frustration with society at the moment is that anxiety seems to have skyrocketed, in the sense that so many people suffer from anxiety. In terms of, it used to be a relatively small percentage of the population, and part of that, I think, is this mobile phones. So particularly teenagers and young people, when they should be out learning how to be in the world and how to be comfortable and how to interact with people, they have this that they can hide behind. So I think that's
I thought that was a whiskey flask. I was like, yeah, that would create it.
Oh, I didn't know I could have one of those with me.
Right. Yeah, I might add to it a little bit.
So I think mobile phones and technology have a lot to answer for in terms of the increase in anxiety in the population, because I see it in young people all around me. They struggle to interact at social gatherings, and when they feel uncomfortable, they just pull their phone out and they can just sit there and escape into that world. So I think, and unfortunately, the other thing with anxiety is I see so many people out there talking about having anxiety, and it is one of the relatively, I'm not going to say simple, because it does take work, but anxiety can be rectified, I suppose, and anxiety can be overcome because it is normal thinking gone awry. But I feel like in society now it's almost kind of considered, oh, well, I've got anxiety, I'm stuffed now, I can't
Yeah.
function well, but it can be overcome, and that's what
Yeah.
I like to kind of really highlight to people.
Can we hang on this for a minute?
Mhm.
And we'll come back
Yeah.
to the depth of processing and who an HSP is. Anxiety. So I was diagnosed with anxiety in 2017, a generalized anxiety disorder. And so they prescribed meds and I got on the meds and nothing changed. Like the only thing that changed was I felt really numbed out to the world and really out of control. Like truthfully, like I didn't have a say in how things went. And so I got off the meds. I couldn't do it. And it was I cold turkeyed my meds, which is you're not supposed to do on these. And I had these brain zaps. It's like these intense zaps. And then after coming clear of it, I started working on tools to just manage the emotions and manage the thinking. And that's what I teach today, because now it's like I don't get anxious like that anymore. I might have some stress, but I don't get anxious like that. It's pretty much gone. So I think, like phones, you look at a phone, it's a form of numbing out. Like, cause you can get on TikTok and just scroll. Next thing you know, 5 hours are gone and the emotions haven't changed. Like you still have to come back into those emotions and face them. Right. So what do? We numb out again. Like we just dive right back into the rabbit hole.
Yeah. Not only that, but I
Exactly.
think it starts to create the anxiety in you as well. So
Yeah.
I remember being in a place of anxiety and having this like really nervous energy coming up inside of me all the time. So I was diagnosed with my postpartum depression back in 2011. I tried to take the meds that they prescribed for anxiety, and I was awake for 38 hours straight. I couldn't close my eyes and sleep. I was so wired and just like out of it, but so wired 38 hours straight until I went to the hospital and they had to give me meds to sleep and get it out of my system. And then they put me on something different that wasn't meant for anxiety, but had the side effect of helping with anxiety. And I was actually on that for, gosh, a good 5 years and then came off of it. Right. So I had a different experience with that and was able to take the meds to deal with it. But what I found is when I was in that place of anxiety, I would be, trying to get my mind off of it by watching a TV show. And I remember one of my friends telling me, don't watch anything that has any drama. Don't watch an action movie, or don't watch a drama TV show that's full of ups and downs. Watch something like the Hallmark Channel or a love story or something, because the ups and down in the movie is actually going to take you up and down and create the anxiety inside of you because you're feeling what's happening in what you're watching. So the actual content itself inside is bringing up that anxiety as well as, and that's why they talk about video games creating anxiety in children, because the video games have such an adrenaline rush and the shoot 'em up and the car chases and all of that. It's creating that and bringing that energy up, that anxious energy up inside.
I want to go back to this, right? The definition of anxiety, because here's a version of it, which could be excitement, right? I'm excited. My baby's being born.
Yeah.
Same flow of energy, right? So definition of anxiety as an operational definition for this show, what would that be? Like,
I always refer to anxiety as normal thought processes that have just gone a bit awry. So they're just kind of a bit out of whack. And if we can normalize them again, and I love what you said about you can reframe it as excitement. And Mel Robbins does a lot of work, the 5-second rule. She does a lot of work with anxiety because she's overcome her own anxiety so that she could help her children. And she says exactly the same thing, that and I think this is one of the things that's missing and is lacking because of the technology, is we don't teach young people to normalize the thought processes and the anxiety that it is natural to feel. So one of your listeners just asked before, is all anxiety negative, bad, or unhelpful? And I would argue, yeah, that one. So no, it's not, because anxiety is a normal part of life. Like feeling anxious, like if you're going to a party, or even before, like say before I jumped onto this show today, guess what? I had some feelings of anxiety. and that's normal. And I think we kind of have forgotten to teach young people that, so they grow up and it gets worse and worse, and it gets more magnified and more magnified, and that's when they end up needing medication because it becomes so out of control that they can't rein it in themselves.
Yep.
Whereas I feel if we taught people, like Mel Robbins does, to reframe it as excitement, because the physiological response in your body is exactly the same with anxiety as it is for excitement. So that's pretty much how she, obviously it's not as simple as that, but that's how she fixed it for herself, is reframe it all the time as I'm feeling excited. And that's, Nick, essentially what you just said.
It's a practice too, because you might not be very good at reframing that. So when you say thoughts that have gone awry, it truly is. It's the thinking around so the thinking creates the emotion, and then the emotion impacts the thinking so that more thoughts come up, which keeps the emotion going. And depending on the type of thoughts you're having, it'll determine what kind of emotion you're experiencing, whether it's positive or negative. So it's not inherently good or bad, right or wrong, negative, useful. It's just, it is what it is. It's just a chemical response in the body.
Yep.
So
exactly. And the way we teach it to the kids is by telling them that someone pulled the fire alarm inside their brain by accident, right?
Yeah.
And like, picture your brain as a fire station. Someone pulled that fire alarm by accident. All of a sudden, your whole body thinks there's an emergency when there's not.
Yeah.
So that's how we describe that to the kids for their understanding.
Yeah. So and I think just as the example that I used before about coming on this show and how my thoughts could then generate my emotions and could cause a spiral effect if I didn't rein them in. Yep. So when I was kind of getting everything ready, plugging the microphone in, and I started feeling those, what you could say were anxious feelings, if I'd kind of then allowed my thoughts to go, oh my gosh, what if I forget what I'm going to say? What if I don't know what to say? What if there's really awkward pauses? What if I just completely stuff up? I'm going to be so embarrassed. Like, you can see how those thoughts are then going to start to spiral, and then that's going to boost the feelings of anxiety. And then I'm going to come on and potentially be a blithering mess because my thoughts have kind of spiraled out of control. Whereas what I actually did is I said to myself, you know what, this is normal. It's a new thing. It's a radio show. I'm used to kind of going on podcasts, so it's a slightly different thing. There's two of you. So I just started to think, oh yeah, this is just different. You'll be fine. You know your stuff. You talked about this stuff all the time. You know Nick from before. They're both friendly people. So they're the sorts of thoughts that I went into.
I know. Well, I don't know. I don't know about Nick. I'm friendly.
So you can see how what Nick was saying about those things.
I play friendly on Facebook, right? Like,
yeah,
put up that facade.
The Facebook Nick is friendly.
Yeah, he's the nicest guy. You'll love him. I really, going back to your acronym, right? The depth of processing and anxiety, the thinking patterns, because you go into the processing, or your ability to process stuff like this. So you go into that thinking pattern. And if I'm understanding this, there are people that really, they can't hold on to a thought long enough to do that processing, right? It's just like there's so much going on. Is that accurate?
So, yeah, that's not depth of processing, though. That would probably be when we're talking if anxiety is taking over. So it's kind of taking you away from being able to process deeply.
Okay.
So depth of processing is more around, we're just making sense of the world and looking for the whys and looking for the links, and our brain just wants to know more and connect more and understand everything. Whereas people who are not HSP, they don't have that necessarily. They do have depth of processing in certain areas. Like if it's something that they're really interested in, they would go into deep processing. So depth of processing is something that all humans have, but HSPs tend to live in that depth of processing world. We can't kind of turn it off, whereas non-HSPs would have moments of deep processing, whereas most of the time they'd be just processing at a more shallow level.
So as an example, if I were totally into, let's say, cars, and all I could think about is cars, I want to know how they work. I want to know the mechanics behind them, kind of like fractals, right? Like in that way, I can't shut it off.
Yeah.
But most people will do that, but they'll come back out of it. And where an HSP is they don't come out. They stay in that rabbit hole, and they keep looking for more things to learn about that thing. So they really know a lot, honestly, about maybe one thing or a lot of things. They know a lot about those things. Is that accurate?
Yes. And
Okay.
it's exhausting because, as you say, there's that rabbit hole. And a
Yeah.
lot of HSPs talk about going down the rabbit hole.
Mm.
So he's saying, what's going on? Why am I feeling this way? When have I felt this before? Yeah. So it's linking. It's all that linking. It's kind of going back to previous experiences. Oh, and like, so for the example, the cars, somebody
Yeah.
who's not that interested in cars, they'd kind of have a look at the car and just be like, oh, that's a nice car.
Mhm.
Whereas
Yeah.
if you're really into it, you'd want to get under the bonnet. You want to try and understand how the engine works, how the pieces all fit together. That's the depth of processing. You'd potentially want to read a book about how all the bits work together, whereas I couldn't care less about cars. And so I'm
Right.
not going to, but
Yeah.
I'm still going to have that depth of processing and linking things, but just perhaps not in as much detail as I would if I was into cars as
I
well.
like
But
that.
it's exhausting.
And do they do that for everything in life, like every aspect of life, or just certain things that they choose?
All the time. And that's why they need a lot of
Mm.
downtime and alone time, because
Okay.
it's exhausting to have your brain that active all the time and not be able to switch it off.
Yeah, the brain produces electricity. So if you're firing the brain all the time, it produces a lot of electricity. It takes a lot of energy, and it consumes most of the energy in the body. It's like 20-25% of the energy goes
25%.
right to the
Yep.
brain. And
Mhm.
so to have that just running constantly, there's no break, there's no rest from it at a unconscious level. Basically, they don't go unconscious. They don't go into that subconscious state, right?
Mhm.
Mhm.
So you're always in the conscious state, and consciousness can be really exhausting,
Yeah.
really costly, right?
Yep.
And that makes me think, like, do they sleep well at night, or are they up thinking about things at night
Very
too?
interesting question. Yes. So a lot of HSPs have struggles with sleep. And that's one of the things that is recommended for HSPs, is to make sure that they prioritize sleep
Mm.
and that they establish a healthy sleep routine. But a lot of my clients have insomnia. A lot of my clients, just have challenges with getting a good night's sleep. So it is really important to establish a healthy sleep routine if you're a HSP.
Well,
So
yeah, I
let's
can imagine if your brain is in the conscious mode all of the time thinking like that, how do you even shut it off to go to sleep?
Yeah, and it's interesting to find things that do help you. So, for
Yeah.
example, for me, I've had there's particular TV shows and Netflix shows that I get completely absorbed in, and I've actually, as I was growing up, I was always had these favorite TV shows, to the point where I used to record them, and my dad and my family used to give me a bit of stick about it, because they were kind of like, oh, TV addict and all that sort of stuff. And now that I've learned about being HSP, I realize that that's my escape. So if I'm completely absorbed in a TV show or a movie or whatever it may be, that's like having a break. That's like
Mhm.
turning this depth of processing off.
Mm.
So it's really important as a HSP to find those things where your brain does shut off and you can have that kind of bit of respite from the the amount that is going
Yeah.
on there most of the
Oh
time.
my
I think
gosh.
this is useful. So you might
Yeah.
not be an HSP. I think of somebody that's not an HSP, but they have intense emotions. Maybe somebody going through trauma, or they've got heavy emotions that impact them. What works with HSP could work in that situation too, because truthfully, your brain's going. Your brain's just like firing,
Yeah.
firing, firing. They say we have 50,000 to 70,000 thoughts a day. And it sounds like HSPers are aware of every single one of those, right? It's like, not only do I have those, but I know which ones they are, right? But somebody that maybe is struggling with anxiety, or they get triggered from trauma, or they just get triggered and they don't know where it came from, and it brings up these emotions. Some of the tools that you would use to soothe inside of HSP could be useful there. And so I would wonder, so you talked about zoning out in a TV show. Like, people might say, "Oh, you binge watch Netflix." That's not very useful, right? Or,
Mhm.
I don't know, like, some people, there's takes on everything. Like, you can overdo anything,
Mhm.
drugs, alcohol, anything. Um, some people might use a glass of wine to calm down, to soothe, right? And
Mhm.
then people are like, you shouldn't do that because you have anxiety, so it's going to cause this, right? So I would wonder what tools would be useful in that situation, that would serve somebody that's handling any kind of intense emotion but that maybe you use? Does that make
Well,
sense?
I think it's important, as you say, the purpose of what you're doing and are you overdoing it? So binge watching Netflix, if you're using it to numb out, as you talked about before, or if you're using it to escape the world and not actually have to like deal with what's happening for you, then obviously that's not a helpful coping mechanism. But if it is almost like a strategy that you use and you recognize that it helps you, then that's a different story. And the same with alcohol. Like if having a glass of wine at the end of a tough day actually helps you to relax and you're not having 2 bottles every night, then I don't see the issue in that. So I
Right.
think it is about what works for you, and are you doing it as an escape in terms of because you don't want to deal with what's happening in your life, or are you using it as a respite, kind of like I just need a little rest from what's going on here? Then I think that's a different story. So anything that relaxes you, so reading a book, listening to music, watching Netflix, watching your favorite TV show, I've heard some ladies, like some of my HSP ladies, like watching funny cat videos on YouTube. That always kind of gives them a bit of a boost, and it gives them a laugh. So it really is just about, I think, being aware of what those sorts of things are for you. And for example, when you talk about changing state, you guys would have heard of that. So when we change our state, which you can do through listening to music, for example, like I know listening to my favorite music, I can't help but have a little bit of a dance and a sing, and that always lifts my spirits. So it's about being aware of what those activities are for you, and then strategically using them to shut your brain off, or to have a bit of an escape from perhaps a rabbit hole that you've gone down, or some anxiety that's going on for you.
I love that.
I do too.
Yeah. Useful.
Yeah, I just love the explanation of it, because I've done that before and sometimes felt guilty about, watching a show instead of sitting and reading a book or whatever.
Yeah.
And when I go through it and when I reason through it in my mind, I'm like, well, when I'm reading a book, I'm learning something, and I've been at my computer for 5 hours and I need to shut my brain off. So if I go read a book, I'm not shutting my brain off. I'm actually, sitting here trying to learn what's in the book. And so I'll go watch a movie. And I'll tell you, if my kids are with me and I'm watching that movie, I do go that deep. I'm like a part of it. I'm like right in it. And if somebody talks in the middle, it drives me nuts. It's like you just pulled me out of it. You know what I mean? Because I'm so deep in the experience of it and floating in that. And that side conversation is pulling me right out of the experience. And I'm like, it like snaps me out of it. But now that explanation explains it for me. It makes
What
sense.
I hear in that is my mom's voice. Like, shouldn't you be reading a book? Shouldn't you be doing, it's like
right?
that's that guilty voice of,
Yeah.
oh, you should be doing something more useful with your time, not playing a video game.
Yeah.
I play, on my phone after a long day, or I've got, a lot on my mind. I'll disconnect with a video game and I'll play a game or two, maybe at the most, like a glass of wine, right?
Yeah.
Because it just takes me out of that element. Like you say, it just pulls me away from reality for a minute. It just pulls me into dreamland, like a show would do. You don't have to do any thinking there. It would pull you in for a minute. But how do you re-engage? So what would you say to somebody that needs to re-engage and they've been pulled off and they're scrolling? How do you create it so that you start re-engaging? You come back into life and you start interacting again. Does that make sense?
Well, I think, again, the thing that underpins pretty much everything when it comes to personal growth and self-development and doing all these things that we're talking about is self-awareness. So it's about becoming more aware of what we're doing, how we're spending our time, the impact that is having on us. So some of my clients, or one of them quite recently, one of the things that she noticed is she was getting every morning sucked into the black hole of scrolling on her Facebook feed. And she'd look up and, no joke, 2 hours would have gone by, and she's missed her gym class. She's gone done all these, missed all these things because she's gotten sucked into this Facebook scrolling. So what I suggested she do is potentially, like, a couple of things you can do. You can kind of set up rules for yourself. You can use a timer. So I suggested to her, well, maybe you set a timer, so you only do 10 minutes or 15 minutes of that, and when the timer goes off, you stop. Or you're only allowed to do that when you've perhaps gone to your gym class, for example. So you kind of have it as a bit of a reward, as opposed to something that just sucks you in and then you just don't live your life because you've spent it on Facebook scrolling. So it all comes down to being aware. And if we don't have that self-awareness, then we're never going to be able to implement any sort of strategies that will be helpful.
I like this. We're 25 minutes in and we've only gotten to depth
The
of
D.
processing.
I know. I was
know.
sitting here
Like, I
thinking
want
the
to know
same
the
thing.
rest.
I'm like, there's still O, E, and S. What are they?
Shall we go to O then?
Yeah,
Is that
let's
a good
go to the O.
segue to O?
Yeah.
All right. So O is for overstimulation. So HSP's nervous systems are more reactive than non-HSPs. So we get overstimulated very easily. So it could be noise, crowds, too many demands on our time, even something like a long commute to work. So basically, if we're sitting on the train for an hour each way every day, that can be exhausting and overstimulating for us. So again, it's about recognizing when that's playing a part and being okay with, because a lot of HSPs, particularly the extroverts, and we'll talk about the difference between introverts and extroverts at some point. Why is there only a 1 hour limit? Maybe because we might go for 3 hours.
Yeah, we have lives, dude. Like,
yeah. Well,
and we love you. And yeah,
it sounds like he wants to hear more of us, though. So that's nice. Thank you. So yeah, overstimulation, and again, it's that recognition of when, because a lot of HSPs, because we're different, so it's only about 15 to 20% of the population that are HSPs. So we often grow up thinking that there's something wrong with us, and then when we get overstimulated, we kind of get frustrated because, or we don't understand, and then we feel bad because then we look at other people and go, well, why can't I do that? So there's a lot of that kind of beating ourselves up. But if we get to the point where we recognize, well, this is just the thing that happens to me, then I can actually take that time out. And some of the strategies that we've talked about already would be applicable for the overstimulation as well.
So again, it's a way to soothe, right? So the emotions are intense, the thoughts are going, the beliefs are going, the self-talk is going, perhaps. Just anything that gets you to step back from that. So dialectical behavioral therapy, are you familiar with it?
Not familiar with it, but I've heard of it. Yeah.
They use it with borderline personality disorder. I could see it being useful in complex trauma and HSP. It's just simply things that create distractions initially to get you out of that impact of the emotion. So whatever that is, that might be cold shower, that might be smells. Somebody gave me these oils. It might be smells. It might be just anything that just shifts your attention. And then as your body starts to calm down, then you move into dialectical, right, where you're talking it through. And so how important is it that when somebody's working through this, that they have somebody that they can talk this through with as they're learning this process? Is it vital? Is it necessary? Can they do it on their own?
I would suggest they can do it on their own, but the challenge is, because we're such a small percentage of the population, then most people grow up thinking that there's something wrong with us. They don't understand that this is a normal personality trait to have. So just to clarify that as well, this isn't a diagnosis. This is a personality trait that people are born with. And so it is about and the only reason that HSPs have struggles in this world is because the world is not set up for HSPs. It is a very overstimulating world that we live in. And so that's why we struggle, is because the world is not set up for us. So it is about, I think the big thing for HSPs is, first of all, learning that they're HSP. That is a massive, I had a friend of mine messaged me last night on Instagram that she talked to a friend of hers and said, check out Jenn's work. The message she got back from her friend was, I did Jenn's quiz, I've been reading her material, and I spent the entire time crying because she finally got to this place where she was like, wow, there are other people out there like me, and there's nothing wrong with me. I'm just different to everybody else. And that obviously means so much to me to read those sorts of things. But I think that's why it's so important for HSPs to understand they are HSP and what that means, because that normalizes it immediately for them. And then they recognize that there are other people out there like them, and they can talk to them. When they join my Facebook group, that's one of the big things they say, is that, wow, it's so good to talk to people who actually get me, and I don't have to explain myself because they're just like me. So I think, in answer to your question, yes, it's really helpful for them to have other people around them who understand what it is that they're going through and what it is, the daily struggles that it is.
It creates empathy and compassion, right?
Mhm.
Which we're trying to develop in ourselves. A lot of people don't get that in childhood. They don't get that during development. And so they come out into the world not broken, but just underdeveloped in that area. And so having a group that you can lean on allows you to start building that and developing it for yourself. Because I would imagine there's going to be a point you don't need the group as much. You want the group, you enjoy the group, but it's not as vital as it was in the beginning. Is that fairly
Yes. Yeah, you
accurate?
kind of
Yeah.
find your feet and you feel a little
Yeah.
bit more comfortable in who you are and what you are, and being okay with that. And definitely, yeah. So it's more about then a choice to hang out with like-minded people rather
Okay.
than a
Mhm.
need because I'm trying to fix myself, so to speak.
Right, right. But in the beginning, it might be that. You might be
Mhm.
leaning a little harder than most, right?
Definitely.
Yeah.
Yep.
So what is the E?
The E is for what you just mentioned, empathy. So
Mm,
empathy and emotional responsiveness and reactivity. So HSPs have very, very high levels of empathy, and their emotions are much more pronounced. So that's the emotional reactivity. They're much
Mhm.
more pronounced than non-HSP. So the way I like to kind of paint a picture is, obviously everybody has ups and downs in their emotions. So if you were to draw a graph, it would just be like a bit of a roller coaster. A HSP's roller coaster, the dips and the highs are just much more pronounced. So we go much higher and then we plummet much lower as well. So we have big emotions. And that is one of the more challenging ones for our loved ones to deal with. So, for example, what's happened for me in my life recently is my dad and my fiance are both very introverted. So they're opposite to me because I'm an extrovert, but they're also not HSPs. So they struggle immensely with my big emotions. And there's been something that's happened recently that I've gotten really, really excited about in my life. And both my dad and my fiance, and I've spoken to them about this, so it won't be any surprise that I'm putting this out there publicly, but they're both in trying to protect me. They're trying to kind of dim down my excitement and kind of pull me back down a little bit more
yeah.
normal, because they think that, like, mistakenly think that because I get so excited, if it doesn't work out the way I'm hoping, that my crash is going to be really, really bad. And
Mm.
I had to explain to them, my crash is going to be really, really bad no matter how excited I get. Like,
Yeah.
that's just the
Yeah.
big emotion. So they're doing it out of love because they're trying to protect me, because obviously they have to be there to pick up the pieces when things do go wrong. But that's just something that, yeah, people in our lives struggle to deal with because the emotions are so big, and they just kind of get a little bit, whoa, they're not quite sure how to deal with it.
Yeah.
I just pictured Elf seeing Santa Claus, in the movie Elf. Right?
Santa, I know him.
Uh, so we've
Oh,
got
So
well,
some
that
quotes here, but they're big, so I'm gonna move them. I'll
okay,
I'll save them for the comments. Go ahead, Melissa.
I
okay.
was just gonna say, so far you're describing me to a T, and it's so funny that brought me to when you talked about empathy, it reminded me we there was a young girl in our church congregation that was very ill, and they had put out to our prayer group to pray for her, and so we were all praying for her, and she came through with flying colors, and she's 17 years old. She came through with flying colors, and she came to mass like after months and months of being in the hospital. Her and her family came to mass, and it was during Advent, and the family came up and they lit the Advent candle for that week. And I was so moved by it, and so moved by seeing this girl at 17 years old, like, walk up there, because she was really sick. She was like, she had a brain aneurysm, everything. She was really, it was touch and go. So I was so moved by this that I watched them light the candle and I started crying in the pew. And I was just, and I didn't even know them personally. They were just members of the church. And so I got through it, and we got through the mass, and I went up to them afterwards, and I was trying to be so calm and just say, it's so great to see you here. And I just start bawling. I don't know her mother. I'm introducing myself to her mother, and I'm like ugly crying in front of this woman and just telling them how good it is to see her there and that we've been praying for them. And the priest walks over, and he messaged me afterwards and said, thank you so much for just like sharing yourself in that way, and I love how much empathy you have and everything. But I was literally like ugly crying, just trying to tell them how wonderful it was to see them, but I couldn't even stop it. And it's just this big emotion in empathy for other people, and I have it all the time. And it's like sometimes I think to myself, oh my God, can you just like rein it in? Like
And I think that's what you just said there is what so many HSPs think is, I wish they could be smaller. I wish I could
Yeah.
control them. But one of the things I like to point out is I think that right there is one of the most beautiful aspects of being HSP, is our ability to care, is our ability to show empathy for our fellow human beings. And I think it is one of the big things, because I believe that HSPs have the power to heal the world because of this empathy, these emotions that we just feel. And and there's also the S, which we'll get to in a minute, but it's exactly that you said, that sometimes we wish we could make them smaller and we wish we could control them. But it really is what draws people to us as well, because they see how we feel and they sense that empathy coming from us. And the other thing that I think is really a telltale sign that you're probably a HSP is if you're somebody who you meet somebody and within the first 5 minutes, they've pretty much told you their life story or they've told you all their problems.
Oh
That's a
my
very
gosh,
common experience.
that
Yeah,
happens
because
to
they
me all the
sense our
time.
empathy.
Yeah, that happens to me all the time. I was in line at the church for confession, and I had someone like start talking to me and tell me her whole life story in line. I'm like in line, just like minding my own business, waiting to go for into confession. And I just knew this woman's whole life story. I'd never met her before. It happens to me all the time, everywhere I go.
Yep. That's a big sign that you're HSP, because they sense that, or we give off, I don't know what it is, whether we give off vibes or whatever it is, but it just seems to happen a lot. They know that, or they feel comfortable with us immediately. I think that's what it is. Whatever vibes we're giving off, they feel that comfort coming from us, and so they're more likely to then open us up and tell. Because some of the stuff people has told me, I just and people have even said it to me. I have never told a soul this before in my life, and then they've just told me, and I'm a relative stranger. So it's quite common.
Huh. Okay, so what's the S?
The S is sensitive to subtleties. So again, this is, I think, one of the things that makes HSPs beautiful human beings, is because we're the ones that are going to notice if you've shaved off your goatee, or if you've had a haircut, or you've slightly changed your hair color. The HSP will notice that.
Or your hair grows.
Yes,
Yeah,
if you end up with dreadlocks.
It's not happening, especially back here. It's definitely gone. It's gone. Yeah.
And more on the flip side of that, or an extension of that, is subtle changes in tones of voice, facial expressions. A HSP is going to pick up on that. So we notice if somebody's upset. We get a sense of people very, very quickly. So I've had situations in the past where I've sensed that something's a bit off with someone, in the sense that I don't really want to know them because they're not a very nice person. And it's caused rifts in friendships because I've expressed that to my other friends and they don't see it. And it's not till months or years down the track that this person's true colors come out. And I go, oh, okay, great.
Yeah.
Wearing a coat or a sweater.
So I had a sweater on in the other show.
I often experience that, and the most uncomfortable part is when you experience that with someone that everybody else around you is speaking so highly of and is loving. And I've experienced that and just gone up and had a conversation and been like in a room full of people who are like worshiping this person and been like, I'm not feeling it. I am
And I
trying really hard to
guarantee
feel
She
you
it.
says
would have
that
been
to me
right.
all the time. Yeah,
That's
Nick,
not true, Nick.
I'm not feeling it, man.
That's so not true.
I don't get the adoration though like that in the room either, so that helps.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I think I
But
gave
it
you
is
lots
hard.
of adoration.
No, I don't mean from you. I mean the other way.
Okay.
Yeah, no.
Not from everybody else in the room?
Yeah,
You're not being worshipped.
No, I don't want to be. Don't want that. I'm good.
No, but
But
it's
yeah, I think that
uncomfortable,
is,
right?
yeah, it is because if you say something, you kind of feel like, because the other thing about HSPs is they're very conscientious. So they like doing the right thing and they want to get
Yeah.
things right. They want to be good people. So we often then feel like we need to warn people about those sorts of
Yeah.
other people, and we can get ourselves in trouble as a result. And it happened to me. Like, I caused a rift in friendship until, of course, years later I was proven correct and this
Yeah.
person's true colors
Yeah.
came out. So it is quite hard to navigate those sorts of things. And the other challenge that a lot of HSPs have is they often ignore that instinct or that intuition, because intuition is a strength of HSPs because of our brains process and our nervous systems taking in so much more information. Our intuition is strong as a result. But a lot of HSPs, particularly those who have grown up with a bit of trauma, or if they've grown up thinking that something's wrong with them, which is again quite common, they tend to ignore that intuition. And they give, because the other beautiful trait aspect of HSP is we give people the benefit of the doubt. So we kind of have this naive view that everybody else is like us. So we're quite shocked to learn about narcissists and sociopaths and all that sort of stuff, because we're just horrified that people could be like that, because it's like our polar opposite. But that's why they often are the victims of narcissists, because they give them the benefit of the doubt, or they ignore that intuition, that gut instinct that's saying to them something's not right here. But I guarantee you that gut instinct is correct 100% of the time.
Yeah, loads of unsolicited advice offered. Me.
Yeah, and you know what? I am literally just realizing right now that this is describing me to a T. And the benefit of the doubt thing, like I've fallen into the same trap so many times. And you know who called me on it, Nick, was Laban. Laban called me on it because I met someone who everyone spoke really highly of, and I wasn't feeling it after I met the person. And the person had written a children's book, and I gave them an invitation for Storytime Yoga. And
It
Laban,
wasn't me.
No, it wasn't you.
Just to
No,
clarify.
it wasn't you. But Laban called me on it, and he said to me, you know, if you were feeling that way, why did you send the invitation? And I said, oh, the benefit of the doubt. Like, everybody, maybe he just had a bad day. That person, he or she had a bad day, and you know, maybe everybody else was right, and I just misjudged that. So I thought, okay, benefit of the doubt. We'll see what happens out of this, right? And Laban called me on that and said, you know, why didn't you just listen to yourself and listen to your intuition? And it's true. I do the same thing all the time.
Mm-hmm. And it is hard when you're the only one feeling it. It is hard to stick to that and not start to doubt yourself.
Or you're the only one ignoring your intuitions. Everybody else's are like, yeah, don't do this. And you're the one going, yeah, I'm in. I'm 100% in. Let's go. The thing that I hear in this is, people throw around terms a lot. You know, you're codependent, you're a narcissist, you're an HSP, and we have traits for so many things. I had a therapist tell me, just because you have traits doesn't merit a diagnosis. But we go around self-diagnosing or diagnosing others as though we've done all the exams and we've done all the testing to show, yeah, you are exactly this, right? So how do we prevent that? And not necessarily how do we prevent it. I love recognizing myself in things like this, because I definitely have these traits, some of these traits. In my HSP, I don't know. I could take the test and see, you know, but how would one really get beyond just self-diagnosis or judgment and get into really figuring out if this is present?
Well, I think the Dr. Elaine Aron, who is the discoverer of the trait of HSP, she would suggest that the does that we've just gone through are much more accurate than her quiz that she has.
Huh.
Okay.
So if you can relate to everything, and the thing is, you have to have all 4 of the does criteria. So you can't just have 2 and be HSP. You've got all 4, and they all show up in your life. And so I would say, based on Melissa's reaction to what we've been talking about, I'd say she's HSP, because she's basically saying, this is me, this is describing me. So it really is that's more accurate than the quiz. And I think you probably know deep down if you're HSP and you're listening to this, because again, there's that intuition that's going to be playing as well, if it's resonating with what I'm saying. But also in terms of labels, I think, because I've got one of my clients who learnt about HSP extroverts, because that's even more unique than just general HSPs, which is what we're talking about at the moment. She hates labels. So she resisted calling herself a HSP for a long time. But the way she described it is, and I think this is really good, is that if it helps you understand yourself and it helps you get to a greater sense of self-acceptance, then it's helpful. And if it helps you feel like you belong somewhere, as opposed to, oh, there's something wrong with me, then it's always a good thing. So I think it is about, I think, how you use the label, and are you using the label for good or evil, I suppose, is a way to explain it. Like if you're just plastering a label on somebody because you don't like them, so you call them a narcissist, because I think that's what happens is a lot of people, they label their ex a narcissist because they just don't like them or they didn't get on with them. So there is a danger in plastering those labels around. Because you're right, some people can exhibit certain traits, but in order to fit the criteria in the diagnostic manual, there's benchmarks and there's things that you have to hit in order to meet that. So it can be dangerous to just throw the labels around, but I like it in terms of understanding yourself. I think it is really helpful.
I could see it being useful, even if you're not an HSP, but maybe somebody that has intense emotions. It would be super useful seeing all of these things and the tools that you use and just the understanding. Like, it's okay. You're human and you're just built a little different than other humans, but we all are, right?
It's okay if you watch Netflix instead of reading a book.
Yes.
You don't have to beat yourself up about that.
Right.
Because that's HSPs do have a big tendency to beat themselves up when they're not living up, because they also have very high expectations of themselves and of other people, which often lets us down.
Well, gosh,
because people can't live up to those expectations.
I resonate with all of those. Like at some level, I connect with that. I feel that. I'm more of the introvert type, but if I get overstimulated, I shut down. I'm off and I've got to disconnect, and you got to give me some space, right? So it's interesting to see it, even if I'm not HSP, if I'm an anxious person and I go through the does, what am I doing? Am I over processing? Am I overstimulated? Am I out of empathy? Right. Am I highly sensitive to what other people are doing and maybe interpreting that in a way that isn't what they're doing, but we read into it, right? We recognize. I studied, movements in the face, where you could, within an instant, a microsecond, see somebody's emotion based on their facial expressions. But if you misjudge it, you might see an emotion and it's wrong, but then you're off and running with all the thoughts, right? So I don't know where I was going with that, but it sounded good while I was saying it.
Well, I think it comes back to, I'll make a link for you. It comes back to that self-awareness. So kind of, if you're aware that you're doing this, or you're aware that, because you just touched on taking things personally. So quite often human beings are egocentric. We're set up that way for survival. We need to be egocentric in order to survive. Back in the day when we were hunted and all that sort of stuff. So
still
we tend to be, So we do have this tendency to take things personally. HSPs perhaps more so because of our sensitivities, and we can pick up on those sorts of things. But if we're aware of that, again, that's when we can catch ourselves when our thoughts do potentially go off somewhere else in a perhaps unhelpful direction, and then we can rein it in and bring it back to perhaps a an alternative explanation, because I think somebody who was watching before talked about it, like our emotions are not good or bad, our thoughts are not good or bad. It's kind of whether they help us reach our goal or not. So if we're having these emotions that are taking over us and distracting us from life, then they're unhelpful emotions because they're not helping us live the way we want to live. And that's when it's time to perhaps make some changes, when we're not getting to where we want to go in life because of our thoughts or our emotions or whatever it is that's kind of taking us off track.
This is super useful. I like this. So I'm teaching a course right now, and the first part of that course is around emotions, emotion regulation. I'm listening to a book. I don't even know the title of it, but she talks about during childhood and development, the attachment styles of people are dependent on the connection that they have with their parents. And a lot of that emotional processing that you do is done in the presence of your parents. And so if they're not available, or they're neglectful, or they're abusive, you don't get that. And so you develop what's called an anxious or an avoidant attachment style. And you don't need people, or you have to have people, or you go into anxiety. But it all goes back into that developmental state where you really didn't get what you needed emotionally. So you don't have a stable emotional level. So you have to teach yourself how to do it now, right? So that's where these tools, knowing this, when you can see yourself in these things, it really puts you in that space, especially if you're an HSP. You're probably going to want to dive into, okay, so how do you regulate this? And then that would take you down a rabbit hole where you would become this expert on regulation, right?
Yeah.
Like I could see how it could really turn into something that would be very useful, because then you would learn to moderate and regulate your emotions because you'd have so much knowledge around it.
Yeah. But again, with everything, it takes that self-awareness to understand what you're doing, and to be able to, because the way I describe self-awareness to people is that ability to almost step outside of yourself and become an observer of your thoughts, of your emotions. The more you practice doing that, the more power you have, because then you can separate yourself. Because a lot of people, when they're in it, they're so caught up in it that they cannot separate themselves from it. And I've had my ladies share with me, because we did in one of my group coaching sessions, we worked on triggers. So how to know when you're triggered, how to pull yourself out of being triggered. And one of the things that they said is that sometimes they don't even know they're in it until after the fact. So it's that self-awareness piece, that ability to be in the midst of these heightened emotions or these spiraling thoughts, and then be able to stop, step outside, and then actually look back on what's happening to then be able to do something different.
Yeah. I like this. Not rabbit holes. That was so last year. This year is
black holes. Yeah. And I'll add to that too, because I think it helps you to plan for success as well. Like I know now, like when we went to Arizona, it was 3 days of like nonstop go. And it took me a few days to recover after coming back from that. And I planned for that recovery. I planned for downtime, like a down day, the day after we came back. I never go to Costco on a weekend. I can't do it. It'll take me down. There's just so many people, and it's so crazy there. It'll literally take me down. I'll have to go home and take a nap. Like I go to Costco in the middle of the week during, at 7:00 at night when nobody's there. But it helps you plan for that, and plan for the downtime that you might need, and plan to be successful at what you're doing, right?
Yep, definitely. Yeah,
Jenn,
and because it is just about.
Yeah,
go ahead.
Go ahead.
It's just about recognizing your strengths, your challenges, and some things that you can't control, like the overstimulation of a HSP. As you say, that's the perfect way of managing that. You take a trip, it's going to be full on, so you need to build some downtime in and not feel guilty about that. Just recognize, well, that's what my body and my nervous system needs in order to function at my best.
I like that. How do people find you, and what are you up to?
Well, the best place to find and hang out with me is my free Facebook group, Highly Sensitive Extroverts. And that's Highly Sensitive Extroverts : Bright Sparks is the name of it on Facebook.
I'm going to see if I can pull it up here.
And that's where I spend most of my time. And that's where people, like, I'm running a free challenge starting in a couple of weeks called Increase Your Inner Peace. So it's about reducing overwhelm and that overstimulation, because HSP extroverts in particular have a issue in overloading our plate. We get excited, we want to learn to meditate and learn a new language and do this every day, and then we realize, oh my gosh, we've overdone it again. So we end up overwhelmed, and when we're overwhelmed, we're not really very nice to hang around. So we get cranky or we get a short fuse. And so the challenge is all about recognizing our patterns and our tendencies, and then how to kind of unpack that so that we can reduce the amount of time we spend in overwhelm and have a much more balanced life. So I'm running that in the group soon, and yeah, there's heaps of like free training and things in there as well.
I'm going to put that in the comments too, because that is a long name for the group.
It is.
So
It is. Yes.
I need Jenn to just stop describing me.
Yeah.
it's like, oh
Get
my
out
God.
of my head.
Yeah. Yep, that's me. Nobody wants to be around me when I'm overwhelmed.
I like that you said, where can people come hang out with me? That's a cool way to say it. Like, where can they find me and come hang out? That's cool.
You know,
I mean,
I
in
have
a group. Yeah, go ahead.
And I have a final question too, because it's highly sensitive extroverts. Are all highly sensitive people extrovert, or are they introverts sometimes?
No, most highly sensitives are introverts. So this could potentially be our topic for our next chat, if you like. So of the 15 to 20% of the population who are HSPs, 70% of those are introverts. So massive percentage are introverts. And when I describe the traits of an introvert, you'll see that they're very similar and they match up quite closely to HSPs. So only 30% of the 15 to 20% are extroverts, which equates to about 6% of the population. So that's only about 1 in 20 people. So about 1 in 5 are HSP, and only about 1 in 20 are HSP extroverts. And so that's because I am one, when I learnt that about myself, it was kind of I already knew I was an extrovert, but when I discovered HSPs, that was the missing piece of the puzzle for me completely understanding myself. And so that's why I chose to work. I don't work exclusively with HSP extroverts. I can coach and work with anybody, but I focus on HSP extroverts just because I think most HSPs think there's something wrong with them, but HSP extroverts more so, because it's almost like we've got two personalities, because extroversion and HSP literally contradict each other in a lot of different ways. So it's quite challenging to be a HSP, but it's even more challenging to be a HSPE, an extrovert. So that's hopefully that answered your question.
Yeah, it does, and it makes so much sense. I just spent the last year of my life looking at whether or not I was an introvert, because I kept telling people that I was an introvert, and then discovered I'm really not an introvert. So it's probably an HSP extrovert.
I think you might be right, because that's so common. So many HSP extroverts struggle with that, because everybody else will tell them, oh no, you're so obviously an extrovert. But because of the HSP traits, they feel introverted because they need the downtime. We need to escape. We get overstimulated. They're all things that are very similar to introverts, but they're actually HSP traits. So what you describe is so common with a lot of my ladies that I meet.
That's perfect. That was a great show. That's a very useful show. Thank you.
It was amazing.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. Fun. Any other thoughts? Any final thoughts?
I think my final thoughts would be, no matter what personality you have, no matter what diagnosis you have, there is always help. There's always a way to improve your life. There's always a way to grow and develop and overcome. And I just really want to highlight that to people. Even trauma, like, we can maybe talk about this on another show, but I'm a BWRT practitioner, and we're getting amazing results with overcoming trauma, overcoming anxiety. And so I just really want to highlight that to people, is that it's not something that you have to be stuck with the rest of your life, is a diagnosis of anxiety or depression or trauma. It can be overcome, and it just takes a bit of work, but it's so worth it if you do the work.
That's powerful. Yeah, I could see that being useful. I'm going to share this video with somebody tonight, actually. So I think it'll be helpful. Yeah. Thank you.
Awesome.
Melissa, any other thoughts?
Oh, I just want to thank you so much for being here with us today, Jenn. I truly, truly appreciate it. It's been a great episode. Great to have you here. And I look forward to the next episode with you.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
For those that are watching, catch us on the next episode. Thank you for being giant. Thank you for the comments, especially. So we love you guys. We'll see you on the next show. Take care.
Bye.